One.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first of our new series of Leaders, Pioneers, and Professionals webinars. The Air League is well known for recognizing achievement with our annual Honours and Awards reception, but we wanted to introduce a new series of inspirational Q&A sessions. I'd like to welcome Major Tim Peake, who is well known to the UK and globally as the first Briton to walk in space, and of course was the first British astronaut on board the International Space Station for 6 months between December 2015 and June 2016. Tim was awarded the Air League's Founders Medal via a satellite link to the International Space Station in what was May 2016. And this, I think, is a very clear illustration of his achievements, because we issue the Founders Medal to a small number of people over the years, and it's for the most meritorious achievement in the whole field of British aviation. So Tim has a vast list of achievements, as well as being an astronaut, test pilot, and explorer. As part of his career path to date, he's also been a soldier, a helicopter pilot, a qualified helicopter instructor, and a deep sea diver, amongst other things. He's an ambassador for charities and the UK STEM agenda, which nicely leads us to the Q&A for Air League members and our guests this afternoon. So Tim, I'll just hand over just for a quick introduction and some and what you've been up to in the last day or so. I have a question that's related to lockdown in a second, but I'll just open up to you just for any initial thoughts before we come to the first posted question, Tim.
Yeah, well, hello, Nick, and thank you for that introduction. And delighted to be joining you here, via this online forum. In fact, I think in many respects, everybody is dealing incredibly well with lockdown and adapting to these new circumstances. And this is exactly what we train for as astronauts, is being able to adapt to unusual circumstances, as we say, normalizing the abnormal. You get thrust into this situation, you have to live with it, you have to deal with it, you have to adapt a positive mental attitude, and you have to overcome your problems. So actually, I found myself communicating with more people during lockdown than I probably would have done otherwise, thanks to Zoom meetings and technology. So glad to be joining you here today.
No, well, that's brilliant. Thanks very much indeed for your time in advance. We have a whole range of questions. They're themed on space naturally, but also career paths in particular, because you have a probably not too dissimilar career path to mine. I left out the being an astronaut part of it and focused on a little bit less of the human endeavor that you managed to achieve. But we got some brilliant questions this afternoon. One of the interesting things about the set that we've got is that we have a huge age range. We've got from 17-year-olds up to our oldest member, which is 79 years old. So it's naturally generated a huge amount of interest this afternoon. So thank you very much for your time. The first question is one that we, from our Board of Trustees, came up with. And in essence, what we're trying to do with our organization is change lives through aviation, and that's have the maximum impact that we can have on young people. And I know the STEM agenda is something that's very dear to your heart. But the first one is the Air League's the UK's largest provider of scholarships for young people, which aim to help support and encourage those who might not realise their full potential or have the means to do so. What advice would you give to someone who might want to pursue a career in aviation or aerospace, but might not necessarily have the necessary support, or perhaps initially the right qualifications appearingly to do so?
Yes, and I think one of the biggest things is to try and encourage people to stick with it, to be positive and to follow their heart, follow their passion. For some people, the route can be smoother than others. I was extremely fortunate at school. I mean, I had I call it an ordinary upbringing. I think these days, ordinary is often not easy to come by, but as in it was a very stable, very secure upbringing. I went to Chichester High School, a state school, but they had a combined cadet force. And for me, that was absolutely groundbreaking. I flitted around an awful lot as a child. I didn't really know which direction I was going to go in. I tried everything and wasn't really, particularly good at sport. I wasn't academically successful. I was very average. But the cadets was an outlet for all of my passion, all of my energy, all of my enthusiasm. And of course, that involved, it was combined cadet force. It had the Army section, which I was in. But despite being in the Army section every weekend, I was off with the Air Force guys because I loved flying. But it was thanks to lots of school teachers who dedicate their time and their effort to providing these kind of facilities. So for me, flying scholarship, which I managed to get through the Royal Air Force, was my first step after the cadets into a career in aviation. Now, not everybody is as fortunate. Maybe kids are going to a school that don't have a cadet force, or it's not as easy to find that route. I think the main thing is that if that's what you're interested in, try and make yourself as knowledgeable about what it is that you want to do. Try and be as good as you can be at it, and just pursue that. Reach out to whichever organizations it is that you want to try and get in touch with, and pursue it and persist. And that is your best chance of actually making an impression. And it's about getting that first step on the ladder, and then you can build from there.
That's really interesting, and leads us on to a little supplementary to that first point. I was intrigued to read on your website that you were up amongst, I think, nearly 8,000 other applicants for your cohort of astronauts on the ISS. What was it that made you stand out from the crowd amongst all those other individuals?
That's a good question. It's one I've asked myself as well, because we're not given the answer. I think that it's hidden from us in terms of the actual test results or the psychological profiling. But ultimately, that selection process, what it's trying to do is it's trying to find somebody who has got a very good broad range of skills. I do know that when we did what's called the hard testing. Now, the hard testing is 1 day where you get tested in things like concentration, memory retention, spatial awareness, a bit of maths and engineering thrown in there. And you have to have scored above average in every subject. So you don't have to have achieved high average. You just have to have achieved above the average in all of the subjects in order to pass. But really what the selection process is looking at, once you've passed those hard skills, that's only 1 day of the selection process. The remainder of the selection process is all about soft skills. It's about the teamwork, it's about leadership, it's about communication, and it's all about how well you can integrate into a diverse group of people. The astronaut corps is multicultural, it's international, and you need to be able to just get in there, muck in, and work very well as a team player. And that's what the selection process is trying to find, is trying to find the characters and the personality that are best at doing that. So what makes what made me stand out to be selected, I can't really put my finger on it exactly as to what thing it was that made me get picked over and above somebody else. But I do think that it does come down to the soft skills is where you will shine as an individual in terms of personality and character. Which is why I'm always, when I go and I talk at a lot of schools, and I'm very engaged in outreach and very engaged in STEM. It's very important to try and give yourself the best opportunities for the future. And I certainly believe the careers of the future are all STEM based, or the vast majority is STEM based in some respect. So it's important to focus on that. But equally as important as your academic skills is to building the character and personality. And that tends to be from getting outside, adventure, exploration. That's where you really develop those skills. So I think, growing up, going through your childhood, going through your teenage years, it's about finding that balance between, positioning yourself strongly in terms of having the best chance academically, but also giving you the chance to develop your personality and develop your character.
Yeah, that's really good advice. That's really great. Thank you for that. I have the next question is, so you've announced that you are going to go back to the ISS for a second mission. And what's the preparation time? What would be the key differences in how you would prepare for that mission compared to your previous time? And how as a sort of general question or general rider to that, how does the rigor of professional training to become an astronaut compare to earlier career training for you and subsequent training actually in the military? What are the key differences on a sort of cultural or professional type basis between those?
Yes, I mean, certainly training for a second mission is going to be easier than your first, in respect of the fact that there's a lot of refresher training going on. And that comes into the second part of your question, really, there, in terms of what similarities are there with prior training in the military. And certainly as a military pilot, you'll be well aware, Nick, that there's a lot of refresher training going on. You might lapse your currency, you might not fly for a few months, and you might need to go and refresh your instrument flying or your night flying. Well, it's the same as being an astronaut. I'm going to need a refresher training on spacewalks, on robotic arm training. I'm going to need refresher on the systems on the space station. What's changed? Maybe components in the electrical control system, the thermal control system, the attitude and navigation systems. But that's a refresher package as opposed to having to learn it all from scratch. So that's why the second mission is a much faster, much easier training flow to go through, if you like. And we probably won't start that until about 18 months prior to launch, as opposed to 2.5 years if you're a rookie astronaut going on your first mission.
That's great, thank you. The next question relates to that a little bit. In the when I was going through my own training, there was no internet, there was none of the gaming technology that's available today, and the focus on hand-eye coordination and the ability to be able to understand if you can fly or not very often came down to experiences like the cadets. What were the things that made you, or in fact, what would be the things that you would do to advise youngsters these days to develop their more practical and hands-on type skills? Would you advise virtual reality type systems or gaming or cadet flying? What would be your sort of mix of advice to early career starters these days?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. And I was very much the same as you, Nick, in terms of limited gaming computer technology. I had a ZX81 with a 16 kilobyte RAM pack on the back of it growing up. And then my dad had his Commodore, and that's when I got an Apache game. It was all monochromatic, very basic graphics. But I played that Apache simulator game from dawn till dusk. And actually it was in terms of looking at it professionally, I was trying to, do auto rotations. I was looking at how you could fly it as accurately as possible, scanning instruments, spatial awareness, hand-eye coordination, all of those kind of skills, you pick up through that. I wouldn't be an advocate of spending hours and hours on computer games. Like I said, you have to have a diverse skill set, and getting outdoors and getting into adventurous exploration is equally important. But in terms of having opportunity, if you are in the cadets, if you have the opportunity to fly, then there's nothing like the real experience for absolutely, immersing yourself. And in the early days of flying as an instructor, you would always joke that the student would lose 50% of their capacity the moment they strap into the aircraft. And that's just simply the fact of you're in this overwhelming environment, and suddenly there's different smells, different noises. There's a big engine firing up. You've got voices talking on the radios, And it's that kind of environment that people will start to clam up and start to lose their awareness. And if you can put yourself into those environments, whether it is in an aircraft, whether it's rock climbing, whether it's hiking, with the scouts or something, an environment that's a little bit stressful, that's pushing you to your limit, and still concentrate on being able to function effectively as an individual. They're the kind of skills that are really good to build up even at a young age.
That's really good advice. I hope my son in the other room is listening to this. He's 14 years old, and I'd love to be celebrating him one day as an astronaut. Next question is related to the scientific endeavor of the International Space Station. What was the most interesting or challenging scientific experiment that you were involved in on board the ISS?
Yeah, we had one in particular stands out, and that was called airway monitoring. Actually, it's very relevant, really, given the situation we're in now with COVID-19. And we were looking at airway inflammation and restricted airways, which is something that happens in space. We're not 100% sure why. We think it's because of the increased dust in the atmosphere, because none of the dust is settling to Earth. But primarily, this experiment was designed to help asthma sufferers here on Earth in terms of the techniques that we were using to identify airway inflammation. But to do that, for the first time ever, we had decided to use the airlock on board the space station in order to lower the pressure, to change the pressure. So as well as having microgravity, we wanted to investigate in a low pressure breathing environment. And that entailed building the experiment inside the airlock and then sealing ourselves in and reducing the pressure and running this experiment there. So very complex, first time that NASA had tried anything like that, and hugely successful. And we've had some great results from it. But I think that's probably the thing that stands out for me as being one of the more complex experiments that we were involved in.
Okay, fantastic. I'll just, I was going to go to one. We have a live stream, obviously, and I've got questions coming up, which I'm just trying to glance to over my shoulder. And an interesting one, actually, on the scope and nature of space travel. What do you see in future between the national, international, and private sector endeavor of space travel being?
Yes, very important. It's something we're addressing right now. I see them merging together, really. That's the short answer. Yeah. Just to explain that a little bit. I mean, space travel has been the domain of national space agencies for many, many years because it is so complex, it's so expensive, and it's so time consuming as well, that to be able to, put humans on the moon and certainly to be able to operate a space station for 20 years has taken an international effort. And what we're now seeing, of course, is that the national space agencies want to go further. We want to go back to the moon, but we also want to go to Mars. And in order to do that, we can't maintain commercial or low Earth orbit operations at the same time as running a deep space exploration program. The funds only stretch so far. And if we want to focus now on deep space exploration, the National Space Agency really trying to hand over low Earth orbit to commercial organizations. That started already slowly. When I was on board the space station, we had SpaceX delivering our cargo vehicles and Northrop Grumman as well in form of Cygnus. And what we're seeing now is companies such as Axiom and Bigelow who have proposals for actual commercial space stations in low Earth orbit. So I think that's what you're going to see happen is low Earth orbit will become more commercial. And actually the national space agencies will probably be the customers on those commercial space stations. We'll probably still have National Space Agency astronauts flying into low Earth orbit as a customer, but it frees up, the national space agencies to do the moon and the Mars missions. But that's not by themselves either. We've just seen in the last couple of days, NASA has awarded Blue Origin and SpaceX to work on their lunar lander. And we already know that companies such as SpaceX with the Falcon 9 will be able to launch components of the Deep Space Gateway. This is a small space station that will orbit the moon. So we're working now hand in glove with commercial partners in order to do deep space exploration. Then throw private in there, you know, at the same time that the same sort of national agencies that were involved in ISS are looking towards the moon. You've also got private enterprises that are looking at putting tourists on a, you know, translunar missions, or even further afield, putting, you know, private astronauts to Mars. I still think that national space agencies will lead the way in terms of deep space, but I think you'll see a much closer partnership between public-private sectors in terms of space cooperation.
Yeah, and another one online, Tim, that's related to some of those issues you've just covered. What about the UK's involvement from a spaceport perspective, specifically in this occasion, Cornwall? Any thoughts on that? How the UK can grow its capability and grow the commercial benefits or economic benefits to the UK even?
Absolutely. I mean, the UK's, you know, had a hugely successful space industry for many, many years. It's been, you know, it was growing at double-digit rates. And it's been largely unsung in terms of that success. And I think it's now becoming more widely recognized as to how successful it's been. We don't think of ourselves as a spacefaring nation, but actually in terms of our telecommunications expertise, in terms of our robotics, in terms of our small satellite sector, in terms of solar panel production, for example, we're absolutely cutting edge in this country. So we have those elements in place. It's only natural, actually, that we also now start towards looking at having our own launch capability. And what a horizontal launch capability offers is somewhere like Newquay in Cornwall, for example, is the ability to insert small satellites into a polar orbit, which, again, the UK is quite well placed. And the polar orbits are very useful for sun synchronous orbits, which can be for Earth observation, for example. These are quite valuable orbits for commercial users. So we very much have a market and a demand for more small satellites and more launches. And it's only natural that we should develop a launch capability to actually capitalize on that.
Yeah, one question that's not actually in this, which just made me think about a couple of points you raised. What about space debris as a commercial opportunity?
Yeah, space debris, sector? And that you know, that's the flip side to this commercial satellite operations. I think what we do have to be very careful about is what are we doing and who is regulating it. I certainly have concerns right now that you know, we are working on an old United Nations 1967 Outer Space Treaty in terms of the regulation and the utilization of space. And in terms of how many satellites we're inserting into low Earth orbit and who's regulating them, and whether or not those satellites have the ability to either deorbit by themselves, burn up in the atmosphere after a number of months, or you know, some take themselves off into an area of space where they're not going to cause a problem. It is a major problem when you have companies who are looking at putting up constellations of 12,000 satellites. That's an awfully large number of satellites in low Earth orbit. And also when you're thinking about that in terms of 5G technology, you know, this is only a short period of time where 5G may even be commercially viable. In 50 years' time, we probably won't care about 5G. We've moved on several steps since then. So it's important that we don't destroy an environment that we need to use for many, many years to come by short-sighted thinking right now. So space debris is a conversation that we really need to be having in terms of how we can utilize that to clean up already the satellites that are defunct and non-operational, and how we control the amount of debris that we're making for ourselves in the future. It's a really vital conversation that needs to be had right now.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. I'll just go back online for a question from Ben Bellchambers. How much do you think an advantage you had through your military training versus some of your civil counterparts on the astronaut selection process?
Yes, I mean, I felt that my military training set me up so well for my subsequent career as an astronaut, in terms of giving me the leadership skills, the communication skills, the technical skills that are required as an astronaut. There was a huge amount of read across, even from a point of view of being a helicopter pilot, in terms of that extra coordination of having, being very comfortable in operating in 6 axes. And when it comes to operating the robotic arm, for example, the robotic arm flies like a helicopter flies with X, Y, Z and pitch, roll and yaw. So there were lots of transferable skills, but at the same time, my colleagues such as Alex Guest, who's a German scientist, he was thinking the same. He said, well, my skills as a German scientist really set me up very well for life as an astronaut. I'm able to transfer all these skills across them. And Andre Kuipers, my medical doctor friend, he was saying the same about being a medical doctor and how well that had set him up. So I think the military background is very good, and I certainly think that it helped me enormously. But I wouldn't discourage anybody who wanted to go into a different field. I would say that there's still many benefits that you will pick up that can read across to becoming an astronaut.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That leads me to a question which someone else included here, and it's talking about recovery time, because I noticed that you ran a marathon. I'm not sure whether that was early into your time on the space station or towards the end of it, but how much time did you realistically take to recover after the mission?
Yeah, the marathon was about midway through, which was perfect, really, because it had given me enough time to acclimatize to life in space. And we were exercising anyway for about 2 hours a day. Anyone who's run a marathon knows that you need a lot of time to prepare, and it's actually quite a selfish endeavor, especially if you have family. The amount of time you need to spend at the weekends just putting in the miles. So I thought to myself, well, if I'm putting in the miles anyway every day, I might as well. It's a great opportunity to run a marathon. But in terms of recovering after a mission, you probably feel physically strong again about 2 months after landing. The flight surgeons would tell you it's more like 6 months. So it's about a day for a day, in terms of a day's recovery for every day you spend in space. And that's because there are changes that take place that even you're not aware of, in terms of very small stabilizing muscles that are supporting your core, that are supporting your lower back. These all take a lot longer to recover than you think. So you might feel like you're fit and healthy again, but actually it does take about a full 6 months to recover.
Oh, right. Okay, thank you. Next question from Jordan Penning. Jordan is avidly writing online. He's writing so much I can't keep up with it. But the question he posted earlier was, what was the toughest challenge you had to overcome in space? And I remember hearing you speak at Farnborough a couple of years ago about the temperature changes, and was fascinated by the in-sun versus the in-the-dark temperature changes. I just wonder whether they were physiological or mental or procedural or whatever it may be.
I mean, that's a challenge for our equipment, certainly on a spacewalk. Yes, you're going from about plus 150 Celsius to minus 150 Celsius around about, from sun to shade. But your spacesuit, accommodates that and takes care of that remarkably well, due to the 14 layers that it has and your thermal control systems. But in terms of personal challenge, I think that the toughest things in terms of a personal challenge are the really high risk areas that we're involved in, or the high pressure areas that we're involved in. So for me, that was a spacewalk. Is definitely a very, very demanding activity. And the cargo vehicle capture, they're really the elements. I mean, when you're capturing that cargo vehicle, it's all on the astronaut. There is literally nobody else at all who can help you do that job. You have 2 hand controllers no automated devices at all. It's completely manual. You don't even have a laser rangefinder to tell you how far away your robotic arm is from the cargo vehicle. You're simply eyeballing it. And you'll know as a pilot to have to fly something manually, to have to eyeball it at night, when you've got more than $300 or $400 million worth of equipment and one person who's responsible for the success or the dramatic failure of the mission. That's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure. And you try not to let it tell, and you rehearse and you practice and practice and practice. But at the end of the day, you're the one who has to grab the controls and make it happen. And that's really what the training is all about.
No, quite exactly. Another one online, which is a slightly different spin on some of the other points we've been discussing. But where do you see the future of the space sector on developing technology for humanitarian purposes? And this particular individual is thinking about technologies perhaps for the internet.
Yeah, so we have a technology transfer program, both with the European Space Agency. NASA has theirs as well, and we're constantly feeding these technologies that are developed for space travel and through space exploration downstream into other applications and other services. What we find, though, is firstly, we're not very good about shouting about it. And secondly, it takes an awful long time. So a lot of the research being done on the space station is fundamental research at the very basic levels of fluid physics, perhaps, or chemistry or microbiology. And by the time it actually filters down to an application that's being widely used on Earth, people have forgotten that actually that research was all done in space and it was space-based. But in terms of some of the benefits of, I think the immediate benefits of the systems we're using are things like recycling systems, revitalization systems. So the way that we purify our water in space is now we're developing and designing portable water purification systems that can be used in the third world. Solar panel development. The sun delivers 7,000 times more energy than we need every single day. But we cannot tap in, or we have not yet tapped into it. Part of that is because of the inefficiencies of solar panels. And there's no industry that is demanding more out of solar panels than space. So these are the areas where we're pushing the development for. And eventually, as the cost comes down and the efficiency of these technology improves, then that's all going to have knock-on effects, back on Earth.
Yeah, fascinating. One that's related to your point about water there and the recycling on board the space station. What do you think would be some of the factors in terms of the support for human life on board that would really limit long-term exploration? I'm thinking particularly, the question just scrolled off the screen, but it was relating to deep space travel to Mars. What are the things that are being done today in food and oxygen generation that would enable that further down the line? Because there's been a lot of talk about it, some of it which might have been slightly oversimplified.
Well, actually, I mean, water and oxygen generation is perhaps some of the lesser problems, because we're already up to about 89% recycling of water on board the space station through purification, through filtration, and then all of our condensation, all the moisture that we breathe, all the urine is all processed back into drinking water. And we're making huge strides in increasing those efficiencies even further. And in terms of our atmospheric regeneration as well, we've got some very, very clever systems now. We use water as well. We take some of that water and we use electrolysis of water to produce hydrogen and oxygen gas. And rather than just venting the hydrogen overboard, which used to be done years ago, we now take the hydrogen and we mix it with the carbon dioxide that we're breathing out. And we use that to produce more water, with a methane is the only waste product from that, a very trace amount of methane. And so we're really developing these very good closed cycle life support systems. Food is one area that we're lagging behind. You have to get the food right for a mission to Mars. Ideally, we'd like to grow a lot more of the food that we need than we are already. We're currently growing lettuce, rocket leaves, for example, edible flowers we've grown in space with good success, but we've yet to grow fruit, we've yet to grow potatoes or vegetables. So we need to make a lot more progress in terms of growing our food. And the problem there, of course, is the weight. If you have to carry all the food that you need with you, that's a huge amount of weight to lift out of the gravity well of Earth. That's very expensive to take into space and to travel with you. So we need to do a lot more research into that, and also radiation protection. That's something else where Mars is particularly challenging. Once you go outside of Earth's magnetosphere, you expose yourself to higher levels of galactic cosmic rays and solar particles. So we need better shielding around our spacecraft. But again, we're making great strides in understanding that. So I don't personally think that there are any technical challenges to going to Mars that we cannot overcome in the very foreseeable future.
Very foreseeable, meaning 5, 10 years, 20
Yeah,
years?
absolutely. It's more a case of getting political commitment and financial commitment. They are the challenges to going to Mars. The challenges are not technical or engineering. It's a case of getting a multinational group organizations to say, we're going to do this. This is the commitment. This is the plan, and sticking to it.
Yeah, okay, that's fascinating. The next question is one from a younger member of ours who says the jet engine, the internet, mobile phones, and social media have been technologies with an unimaginable global impact. What do you think will be the next technology to revolutionize the way we function as humans, and how have your experiences in the space industry influenced your answers? That's a sort of broader technology question that might not necessarily relate to actually being in space.
Yeah, maybe not the right person to ask about that. I've always found predictions very hard, especially about the future. But I guess it's always hard to know what the technology is that's coming around. But as I kind of alluded to when we were talking a little bit about careers in STEM, everything in the future is becoming technology based. And I don't think that is going to be reversed or changing anytime soon. Artificial intelligence is going to be absolutely incredible. It's going to start revolutioning our lives and our workplace and everything. And we haven't truly, grasped AI yet. In fact, a lot of what we call machine learning is not AI. It is machine learning, and we haven't really grasped the true capabilities of AI. We have to also be very careful about it, and we have to use it responsibly. The whole point of AI is that it can do something far more effectively than the human brain. So then we're into a trust issue. At what point do we place our trust and our faith into a machine that can do something more effectively than we can? And we have to trust the result that it's giving us. Because if we could check the result, then we wouldn't have needed the AI in the first place. So there's the whole human machine trust element going on there. But AI, in terms of technology such as drone technology, driverless vehicles, for example, in terms of energy, I think the energy sector is going to undergo a revolution. In fact, I was talking to some people last week about the UK's progress that we've made in Oxfordshire in terms of nuclear fusion. And I know that nuclear fusion has been 20 years away for many, many years, and that's always the common joke. But the reality is that nuclear fusion is very, very close to being achievable. So we have these major technological revolutions that could all occur within the next 50 to 100 years, which will be absolutely groundbreaking.
And just, Tim, to move away from some of the technology for a second, I had a question which caught my eye a second ago, which related to your point about artificial intelligence. And this one was a light-hearted question that literally was, what was the most amusing thing you found through your astronaut training? What was the thing, the term on Facebook was, what gave you the biggest belly laugh?
I think what gave me the biggest belly laugh was when Scott Kelly turned up in a gorilla suit on board the space station. And I was just absolutely gobsmacked that anybody could manage to have smuggled a gorilla suit into space. But we do have, having a good sense of humor and having a good laugh with your crewmates is hugely important. And again, you'll know from a military background, having banter is all brilliant for maintaining morale as well. So there were quite a few moments on board the space station where we would just, play a practical joke on your crewmates and have a good old laugh.
Excellent. Just to go right back to the start of the conversation, and this is partly a personal interest for me, but the question has come up again online. What motivated you, bearing in mind your passion for flying, what motivated you to join the Army versus the Air Force or the Navy?
Yeah, it's a tricky one to answer, but I think I just felt more comfortable, in Army uniform. If you like, when I started the cadets, I was all about, outward bound adventure training. I loved the night hikes. I loved getting dirty. I loved going on assault courses, obstacle courses, going to the ranges, firing the weapons. And that was all very much Army oriented at 13. And then I had my first gliding experience. And ever since I sat in the cockpit of a glider, I realized that I wanted to be in the air, wanted to fly. But I still loved Army life. So it was that real, mixture between wanting to do Army activities, but loving flying as well. So I guess it was inevitable that I would join the Army Air Corps.
And knowing now what you know, would you still do the same thing?
Absolutely, yes. And I think it's really important to, like I say, to follow what you're passionate about. I would have done exactly the same thing. I wouldn't have changed a thing.
Well, excellent. A question, Andy Perkins is one of our former trustees and a commercial pilot. And he's referring to the Artemis program here. And what innovations for sustainable life on Earth you think may come from this program? From
the Artemis program?
Yeah.
I think what's going to be fascinating there is in the medium to long term, once we have our lunar research facility, and once we start really understanding about the regolith on the lunar surface, the quantities of helium-3 that might be available, the water ice that's available at the north and south poles, and I think they're technologies that will, and also when you think about what we need to do there, having a solar farm that's in permanent sunlight to be able to power a lunar facility. We're talking about the abilities perhaps to have solar to microwave in terms of beaming energy back. And I guess it's something I alluded to with the whole 5G satellite constellation being short-sighted, in the fact that what we see as science fiction today, the ability to have massive solar farms in orbit around Earth that can capture all of this energy and then beam it by a combination of microwave and laser down to fixed ground stations on the Earth, and that can provide 24/7 all of Earth's energy needs. That might be 50 years away. So we don't want to destroy an environment that could be absolutely valuable to us in the future, vital to our energy needs in the future. And so the Artemis program is a stepping stone to kind of developing and thinking about some of those kind of technologies where we can live for extended periods of time off of planet Earth, and how we can use those technologies to actually make ourselves more resilient here on our planet and make ourselves more sustainable on our own planet with using less resources.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. A couple of questions that are related to your personal experience on board the IWS. And this is intriguing in terms of your comments about weight and cost and the commercial aspects of getting systems into space. What were you allowed to bring on board on a personal basis?
You get a few kilograms, probably about 4 or 5 kilograms, which is quite generous, really, to take up. And so weight is more restricted than volume. And that probably equated to, say, 3 times a shoebox is about the size of the box that you're given. And really, it's just a case of a few personal artifacts. I took up some things from my sons had given me. I took up photos and some letters, and also I kind of pre-planned all the activities that I thought I might want to do. So I knew that I wanted to run the London Marathon. I love rugby. I knew the Six Nations was going to be on. I wanted an England rugby shirt up there with me. I'm an ambassador for the Prince's Trust, so Prince's Trust t-shirt in there. Operation Rally was another organization I was involved in. So you kind of make a note of, okay, these are the things I want to take up, and before you know it, your bag is full and packed.
They didn't live stream the Six Nations to the ISS, did they?
They did, every single match.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a first.
I can't remember whether that was a good year for England or not.
It was a very good year for England, yeah.
Excellent. Just a few more to wrap up with. A slightly light-hearted question, and I don't know whether this is relating to the Pentagon UFO videos, but someone asked if you were able to take binoculars on board, and did you see anything very unusual that you might not have expected while on board the space station?
Yes, we do have binoculars on board, and we use them when, visiting cargo vehicles are coming. Then we'll get the binoculars out in order to be able to, see them from much further away. But when you're in space, actually seeing other objects that are moving very fast is incredibly hard. And I would take time-lapse photographs at night. Because movies at night, the quality is never as good. So what we used to do is we would set up a fixed camera that would take one photograph every second or half a second, and then you just splice that together in a time-lapse movie. And with the naked eye, everything appeared still and quiet. There was obviously, 100 billion stars of the Milky Way, but you didn't see anything moving. But what was interesting is when you then watch that video back, you would see multiple bright streaks going across that you hadn't picked up with the naked eye, but that would be other satellites that you're seeing when you see the movie put together. So no, in space, we tend not to see other moving objects. The only thing is that by daytime in space, if you do see a bright light in the daytime, it will be another object out there with you, because it's so bright in the daytime that you don't see any planets and you don't see any stars. So if you see a light in space, then it's another object. And there was one afternoon where I was looking out the cupola window, it was daytime, and I saw 3 lights in close formation moving. And I called Jeff, my crewmate, Jeff Williams, across quickly and said, "Hey, Jeff, what do you make of that? We shouldn't be seeing any lights and we don't have any cargo vehicles arriving today." And we were both perplexed for a few moments until we realized it was a leak coming from the Russian Progress vehicle. It was actually Russian urine that was leaking out the cargo vehicle, crystallizing, floating away, and that's what we were seeing. So no UFOs, I'm afraid.
All right. Excellent. Last few questions then, Tim. One on the ISS's lifespan. Do you really see it extending well past 2030? And if not, what are the complexities of the space station aging in terms of cost and logistics and so on?
Yeah, I see potentially elements of it extending beyond 2030. Yes, it's in pretty good shape, the space station. It's an engineering question that can only really be answered by engineers. But when we extend the life of the space station, which we have since 2015, it's been extended in chunks. And now we're looking at, out to 2030. We're thinking about the thermal extremes, the structural fatigue that space station experiences, 16 orbits every day, where it's being exposed to these vast temperatures from day to night, and all of the vibrations that the structure has and has experienced throughout its life. Beyond 2030, I see it going for another 5 years beyond 2030, definitely. And I think by that time frame, these commercial space stations that I mentioned, they're actually one of the plans, for example, for the Axiom space station, is to use the International Space Station as a hub to begin its life. So the ISS will provide electrical power, provide the atmosphere, provide the water, and then gradually the commercial elements will grow on the end of the space station until the commercial space station can detach and become a space station in its own right. So I think that's where you'll see the future of space stations going. And by that point, I think the ISS will have reached its life expectancy.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. One, I think we'll just go to one or two more online in the last few minutes. Someone's asking about what made you become a test pilot. When you made the decision to become a test pilot, following on from being a QHI, was that with an eye to becoming an astronaut? Was it with a view to doing something in the military or in civil aerospace?
No, it wasn't actually. I had just come back from a 3-year tour to the United States, flying Apaches with the first Cav out in Texas. And I came back from that tour. I was already a QHI. And at that time, as an Army officer, I'd taken an unusual career path already. Really, as an Army aircraft officer, you were expected to go up the mainstream career path, which was, adjutant ops officer, get promoted to major, be eligible for squadron command. And to make yourself competitive as an aircraft officer, you had to be competitive against the rest of the Army, be it the infantry, the signals, the engineers, the artillery. I really had kind of thrown that career path away by becoming a QHI and specializing as a pilot, something that officers didn't usually do. So for me to become a test pilot was a natural progression anyway, in the route that I had chosen. But more so than that, it was absolutely driven by my heart, by my passion, because when I was doing the tour on the Apaches with the Americans, we were integrating the Apache into the digital battlefield. Our battalion was the first of what they called the digitization brigade. Yeah. And that was connectivity across an entire brigade, from working with JSTARS, AWACS aircraft, to tanks, to armored personnel carriers, to the infantry, artillery, etc. And I was fundamental to that as an ops officer at the time with the Apaches. I was fundamental in integrating the Apache into the digital battlefield. And that was a lot of testing and evaluation. And I realized how much I enjoyed it, how much I enjoyed the challenge, but I also enjoyed pushing technology to its limits, pushing the aircraft, and thought, this is fantastic. Test flying is where I wanted to be. So it was a very natural progression for me. It felt like a natural progression at the time.
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much indeed. One more quick one online, if we may. I'm not familiar with this as a particular route, but one of the things we do in the Air League is try and help youngsters as much as we can do with advice onto career pathways, and help them practically with scholarships and schools outreach and a number of other things along those kinds of lines, which I know is very dear to your heart in being a STEM ambassador. But what would be your advice to someone who, say, doesn't want to join the military for whatever reason, and they become a civil pilot? What would be your advice for them in terms of embarking on becoming an astronaut?
Yeah, I mean, I'll use Thomas Pesquet, my French colleague, as an example there. He was flying for Air France when he was selected in 2009 alongside myself to be an astronaut. And it comes back to that point about you bring skills from all parts of your life. You use those skills that you've learned, you harness all of that energy and all of that experience into making yourself as a best candidate that you can possibly be to becoming an astronaut. And as a commercial pilot, Thomas stood out very well. You get all these great skills as working in a team, again, working in a stressful environment where you have to be very, very spatially aware, you're consummate professional, you're able to communicate. All of those great skills are equally relevant to a commercial pilot as they are to being a military pilot. So yes, I mean, there's a great example of Thomas, who was able to capitalize on that and become an astronaut on the back of being a commercial pilot.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for that. I just got one final comment from our one of our Life Vice Presidents, who sends his best wishes. Terry was the chap who set up the link to you when you're on the space station 4 years ago. So brilliant. I think he was the first person to connect with you on the call before I think we handed you over to the Duke of Edinburgh for that part of it, which was a memorable occasion for many of us. And I believe your parents picked up your Founders Medal, which
that's
I think
right,
passed on to you.
It was a wonderful evening, and I loved it. I loved ringing in from the space station to join. It was a lot of fun.
Excellent. That's really kind. Thank you, Tim. Just to wrap up, if I may, we have a number of really exciting programs, and I know we've talked about you being a STEM ambassador a couple of times. One of the things that we are very cognizant of as an organization is the fact that with no Farnborough, no REAP, no Cosford, so many other youth engagement opportunities being stymied because of the current lockdown situation. We're trying to push our scholarships program to the right as much as we can do, and some other big youth outreach. We've just been funded by the DFT for 2 programs, the first of which is to help youngsters through what we call our Soaring to Success program. And the other thing we're aiming to do is introduce a program to get youngsters to build planes. So very hands-on activities from an aerospace as well as an aviation perspective. I just wanted to put a marker down for you that, you know, maybe you know, we could get you interested in participating and perhaps at some point fly one of our planes that we produce.
Sounds brilliant. In fact, I've just got my commercial license back again this year, so I'll be delighted to.
There's a nice convenient excuse to do that. That is absolutely brilliant. We thoroughly appreciate your time this afternoon, Tim. Thanks for everything you've done for the industry, for what you've done to promote the UK militarily, industrially, all the rest of it. It's a phenomenal achievement. And thank you so much for joining us. I apologize to anybody online who didn't get the chance to ask their question, because I've had so many of them. It's been really difficult to keep track of them, but I think you've done a brilliant job of giving us your advice, expertise, and a flavor of what is it is a unique experience for Britain. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure joining you. Really delighted, and good luck to everybody who is you know, involved in the Air League and who's looking towards scholarships for the future. Good luck.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Take care.